Well, welcome back to the Tuxes and Tomahawks podcast. I'm Adam Dorito, and welcome to the embassy party, as I like to say here in the civil affairs world of the Army. But anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the new intro video. That's what we're going to be using here, created by Mr. Wulf himself, which I can't wait to introduce to you. This guy, the reason why we're using an anonymous name is because he infiltrated Antifa over the last election cycle. And this is something that I like to focus on from a psychological operations perspective and all the things that we saw during the most recent Trump election. And it's really important to dissect these things. I know I haven't been regular with my episodes. I've been really busy working in politics and the election run-ups, and we already are starting work for 2026. But Wulf, thank you for coming on the Tuxes and Tomahawks podcast, and I'm really excited to learn about your experience today.
You're welcome, and it's a pleasure to be here, man. I'm excited that I found you. I found you right before I did this, and yeah, I think the psychological aspect of it has been my biggest focus on it as well, because I think mental illness actually plays a big role in this, and I think there's like almost like a weaponization of mental illness going on with Antifa, but we can get into that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. These things are deep rooted in the new American psyche, and we have seen the effects running up from 2016, and it was in full exposure during Kamala Harris's campaign run. But the problem is that, and this is something that people don't like when I say this, is that we have a problem with low information voters. They're so in tune with 30-second clips on TikTok or Instagram that they believe that these are the true aspects of what's going on. They don't want to deep dive. They want to think the drones are aliens or there's an Iranian spaceship off the coast of New Jersey, which I'm sure we'll get into later. But it's just that it's more like Occam's razor, right? Sometimes actually the simplest answer is actually the real solution to these things. But the problem is that Americans have been so inundated with propaganda on both sides of the spectrum. I've even seen that in the Republican Party here in the state of Colorado, is that it's up to younger, more motivated conservatives to actually relish the truth into the population and get more voters out there to override these geriatric old retired people who are just using every aspect of their influence as puppet masters, and it's time for that to end. And I'm really proud of you that you got to have this experience, because most people aren't going to have that level of knowledge of what was really going on with the Antifa. So first of all, to start off, Wulf, like, who are you? Where are you from? How did you get involved in all these things? And how did you end up becoming an infiltrator into Antifa in the first place?
So I have a unique background. I spent a long time as a street kid. Actually, when I was in my early 20s, I hitchhiked and I went to the West Coast. I grew up in Chicago. And when I was a teenager, I started going to the cities and just kind of like exploring the more dangerous parts of it. I was really into that as a teenager. Okay, I thought you were frozen there for a second. And that's kind of where my interest took place. And then by the time I was 20, I went to a rainbow gathering, and that was in New Mexico. From that, I stayed there for like a month, like out in the woods with like 50,000 hippies at an anarchist gathering. That's what rainbow gatherings are. And they've been going on since like the 70s. That was like my introduction into counterculture, really. And from there, I hitchhiked to Venice Beach. This is in 2009. And in Venice Beach, I was a street kid for like a year. And during that time, I went back and forth all up and down the whole West Coast. And then after that, I lived in a bus for some time. I spent like 10 years being a professional DJ. And I also, in like the dark period of my life, I had a short-lived run-in with drug addiction, which also put me in a lot of like incredibly dangerous situations. Like I have been in the room with drug kingpins on the West Coast, like literally. Like I've seen large amounts of stuff in front of me, and I've been around people of that caliber who trusted me around them, right? And the reason I bring that up is because even back then, this is several years ago, like life is not in that place anymore, right? But even back then, I was always like, I'm not a dumb guy, and I was always just stunned, like, wow, you're allowing me in this room. This is wild shit, you know? And I always had that thought in my mind of like, if I was a cop, y'all would be so fucked. And I never was, obviously, right? But in my time of being sober, I've become very hyper aligned with conservatism. I honestly believe that the root of the fentanyl crisis and all of this shit that's going on that's killed a lot of my friends is deep rooted in propaganda, in various forms of Marxism infiltrating American culture in like all these different facets. And I really think that people are being morally corrupted and kind of feeling like they have an army to back them of like, it's okay to not give a fuck about anything. And that leads us to things such as Antifa, such as regular people deciding they're going to be drug dealers for the cartels. Like it's a whole spectrum of shit where this like whole dangerous ethos of behavior is it's multifaceted. Do you get what I'm saying? And yeah, so
absolutely.
yeah, my background in my early 20s and stuff, I was a street kid in Venice Beach, and then I also lived in Northern California and saw the entire cartel weed growing industry. I saw the whole thing with my own eyes. Saw giant fields of plants. I'd read the news all the time, hear about the cartel busts that are happening like within miles of where I lived, you know? And I have known a lot of like regular hippies who are like making millions of dollars to the cartels. Like all
Yeah.
of this shit is interconnected. And it was several years ago before I like ever had like I'm gonna infiltrate stuff kind of mindset, where I already was smart enough to realize like these dudes would be really fucked over if I was that kind of person. And so in August of this year, a friend of mine who used to be a really good friend of mine hit me up, and I'm just gonna refer to them as they and them, but not
Uh-huh.
because of the them shit, just to conceal
Yeah.
their identity. And but they had hit me up and they're like, I'm not doing okay, bro, blah, blah, blah. And I hadn't heard from them in a long time. It had been like several months. We kind of had like a bad falling out over some personal drama type stuff.
Right.
But it was a really good friend of mine for several years who I cared about a lot. And when they hit me up and they were like, I'm not doing okay, like I am mega not okay, I was genuinely worried, right? So I was like, where are you? You're in Portland? Okay, I'm gonna buy a plane ticket tomorrow, right? And I bought a plane ticket. And fast forward like a week, I got on the plane. I went to Portland. I get to Portland on my like during like before I bought the plane ticket. I didn't know this, but by the time I did buy the plane ticket, I found out that they were living in an apartment full of Antifa members, right?
Interesting.
And yeah, that's what I said. And they're like, "No, you'll love them, Wolf. They're really good people." Da, 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 right? And I'm just like thinking to myself, like, and I was honestly really concerned because the writing on the wall that I was seeing is that my friend, who was my sober friend, who my entire duration of me being sober, is now doing a bunch of drugs with these Antifa people,
Right.
right? And he's telling me so, right? So I'm concerned. I wanted to go out there and check on my friend, but because I look the way that I look, right? I fully expected like people in Portland are gonna just beef with me. I'm from Montana. I dress moderately conservative. I used to dress like a gutter punk, but I don't now, you
Hmm.
know? And I kind of expected like there might be beef, you know? So that's when I hit you up, is because you might remember that. I was like, hey man, I'm going
Yeah.
to Portland, go check a friend. It might blow up in my face. And if it does, I'm going to be sending you videos.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it did. Yup.
So that, I mean, it's fascinating because like most conservatives who even try to get near these things, they're accosted, they're attacked, and things like that. But you were able to like actually see low level operations, what was actually going on, what these people were thinking, what their thoughts were. So especially like when you got there, what was that experience like? Understanding who these people were, what their actual basis of foundational beliefs were when it came to these things that they were doing in Portland. Because unless you were there or you were actually paying attention to the media that was actually reporting on these things, most people have no idea what was going on. I mean, these people were burning down police stations, setting up,
Mm-hmm.
independent republics of whatever the heck they wanted to do in the middle of an American city. Like, what was that experience like for you?
So with the Antifa individual, upon meeting them, if I had to sum up my encounter as like one thing, and people could accuse me of this as well. Like I have a lot of charisma, right? However, in their case, if I had to sum it up in just like two words, I'd say clinical narcissism. Like honestly, like clinical narcissism. Like these people are hyper fixated on their identity, all forms, which is something I'm new to in the anarchism circles. Like like I'm a millennial. Back when I was in my early 20s, the anarchy crowd was very much a I don't give a fuck crowd, you know? And now the anarchy crowd is very much like all about gender identities and all of this queer shit. And if you're a transphobe or a sex phobe or a then like that's the type of shit that they say. And it's all like a hyper fixation on themselves. That's like the overarching theme, and it's that hyper fixation on themselves that I feel makes them feel emboldened to do what they do. It's because they're like, I'm so important. I'm allowed to do this.
Yeah, and then the problem is you get people that are so worried about themselves, they forget about what they're actually trying to change, and that's like community welfare, how towns interact, how counties interact, or how government even works. And then they get inundated with this belief that they matter. And although you do matter, when it comes to self-discipline, whether it's working out or your religious beliefs or things like that, that's what makes you an individual. That's what makes you a person, right? But when it comes to actually benefiting your local communities and stuff, you have to be willing to have conversations. You have to be willing to work with other people when that comes to writing laws or law enforcement or community safety or things like that. The problem is, I think, is you're correct, is that we have so many narcissists embroiled in this individualism ideology that they've been tricked into believing that they're castrating themselves in a way, right? And the one thing I always joke about is that, yeah, you could be transgender, you can identify whoever you want. This is you have free will as a human here. But the problem is that you're just going to eliminate your own genetic bloodline by doing those things, right? And
I've been saying that for years, and people call me all sorts of white supremacist type of shit when I start saying that.
sure,
Because when I go on that tangent, I'm like, you realize you're partaking in eugenics, right? You are
they are.
literally partaking in the genocide of yourself. And if your whole argument is that this is a genetic thing, you're born this way, it's a thing in your mind that's genetically born into you, you're erasing it by sterilizing yourself.
Yeah, I mean, God gives us free will. I use a religious perspective, but even if you want to use Darwinism, right, is that Mother Nature has a way of eliminating genetic traits that aren't going to survive in the future, right? And one thing I always tell people is, yeah, you might be 0.001% of the population, and I guess your individual rights matter, and that's fine. Like you're entitled to safety, you're entitled to live your own life, but in the long run, you're not going to procreate and you're not going to further society. The only people that are going to further society are those having a marriage between a man and a woman and are having children in order to make their bloodline continue to exist. So, although I feel
Yep.
for these people from a mental illness perspective, like they have a lot of soul searching to do
Yep.
and they have a lot of identity issues, unfortunately, you guys always tout about democracy and this isn't fair and everything else. Well, the if you want to go on the basis of democracy, even though we live in a constitutional republic, that's fine. But the majority of Americans are straight, are heterosexual humans, and for the most part, produce children, and that's the majority of America. So I'm sorry if you want to talk about, democracy. Democracy says that you were wrong, and democracy says although you are entitled to live as a free individual, that's fine. That doesn't mean you get to write the rules and the conscripts of what is going to be happening in the future of our society.
Yep, I couldn't agree more, man. Like straight up. And the thing too that I'll emphasize about these people is every one of them was a Marxist, like outspokenly. Was I'm a communist, I'm an anarcho-communist, I'm a this type of communist, that type of communist, and all of them hyper obsessed with their sexuality, hyper obsessed with everybody else's sexuality, and hyper obsessed with just the hyper fixation on themselves, on their impact on society, and on society bending its neck, its knee to them. You know,
Right. And that's the definition of demonic entity, right? A demonic entity, it's not like some guy you see in a horror movie. It's something that pulls you away from a relationship with God, right? And anything that pulls you away
yep,
from a relationship with God is considered demonic, whether that's tarot cards or, communism, right? And obviously these people, and this is what, as someone who's served overseas and has traveled to multiple third world countries and actually lived in third country shitholes, so to speak, is we have no idea how good we have it as Americans, right? And we
yep,
really take our experiences for granted. Like, I have outlets I can plug my phones into. I can drink the water that comes out of my tap. I have indoor plumbing, right? These are things that really don't exist outside the United States, even in most Western areas, even in Europe, right? These amenities do not exist. We live in a very wealthy nation. Even the poorest person in the United States is a million times more wealthy, so to speak, than the typical street person in Nepal, right? And the problem is they've never been exposed to this, right? And I always encourage Americans when you graduate high school, either join the military for 2 years, join the Peace Corps, go volunteer in a hospice hospital or something like that, but really learn how good you have it. But the problem is most of these kids have grown up in an easy society. And it's like that classic example, easy
yep,
times make soft people, soft people make hard times make hard people, right? So I know I butchered
yep,
that, but people get it, right? And now we're seeing
yep,
a resurgence of that. We lived in the past probably 6 to 8 years of a very soft society where we have to acquiesce to every single individual group and every single person. But I'm sorry, you don't matter. You are not furthering the development of our society if you're bringing down the values that this nation was created on. And as many people don't want to admit it, this is a Judeo-Christian government. This is a Judeo-Christian society. All of our founding fathers, only one of them, Benjamin Franklin, was not a Christian. And he even said at the end of the day, with James Madison, that these laws and these things are written by people with moral religious values, right? Our Declaration of Independence and Constitution are extremely important, right? And these guys were so far thinking from their time period, and they foresaw these things happening in our government in the future, even over 100 to 200 years later, going on the 250th anniversary just this year, right? Is what are we going to do about it to preserve the legacy of those that came before us? Most Americans have not seen warfare. Most Americans have not had to shoot their neighbor in order to preserve their freedom. Our country already experienced that. Millions of people have died preserving those freedoms. And you know what? The people who did believe in those ideologies survived and their families reproduced and they continue on. The problem is that we're allowing a lot of these weaker societies, these weaker humans to exist because, we have to be nice to everybody. But, 100 to 200 years ago, this wouldn't have happened. This wasn't a thing. And this is what kind of comes down to this election this year is that most of these families, these 100-year-old farm families that have been living out west and everything else, they're sick and tired of it. They're sick of losing their family farm. They're sick of losing all these things to taxes and having to pay for gay LGBTQ, park sculptures versus actually fixing our roads and bridges and providing jobs. You're seeing a resurgence of this type of classic American conservatism in the United States, and that's great. People want to call it Nazism, they want to call it all these other crazy things, but it's not. It's okay to have national pride. If you want to go on the George Soros theory of we need to make a one world society, no, we don't. The reason why
yep.
borders
I seem to remember. I was gonna say I remember the CNN interview on 60 Minutes when he admitted to turning in Jews. So fuck George Soros.
That's crazy. But here's the thing: is like borders exist. Countries cannot exist
Yup.
without borders, and we value other cultures. Like when I go to Peru or I go overseas, I enjoy experiencing other culture. I think the food's great. I think the people are great for the most part. You know, minus the domestic terrorism and everything that's else is going on in these countries. But I like coming back to a country that has its own sets of values. Like if everybody was the same, then why would I want to go visit Europe, or why would I want to go visit Africa, or
Yup.
why would I want to go visit India or Asia or anything like that, right? Is that we as humans need to value the human experience cross culturally, but that doesn't mean that we can't abide by the values that created the countries that we have. And a lot of other countries, you know, they value their own individual religion and they idolize their individual rights and how they want to perceive government, but they don't live in free societies. They don't at all.
Yup.
Go to China, go to India. They don't live in free societies. You're sanctioned by the government. They will come take you in the middle of the night. They will beat you with a bamboo cane. They will lock you in a prison, you know, like in Syria for years on end, so you
Yeah.
rot and die, and they will eliminate your family. Americans cannot comprehend that these things exist in other countries, but they do. And that's why I encourage every American to not only do what you did, infiltrate and understand all these crazy different minorities in our country to make you appreciate the values of an American, but travel to other countries. Even go to Mexico. It's not America, and our country is the greatest country in the world for a reason.
Yep. So you actually just touched base on what radicalized me. And I was going to bring that up later in the conversation, but I feel like this is an appropriate time. So after my stint being homeless, right, which was years ago, I had been friends with a kid in Nairobi in Kenya on Facebook for a few years, right? And we had become friends over. I used to have dreadlocks. I campaigned for Bernie Sanders and I had dreadlocks, right? And back then, I was in a Facebook group about dreadlocks, and there was a kid in that group who just like posted a status. It was like, anybody in here know how to DJ? I'm interested in learning how to DJ. And I messaged him. I was like, yo, I'm a DJ. What's up? And then I click on his profile, and he's in Nairobi. I'm like, you're in Kenya? And he's like, yeah, I'm from Kenya. I like live in Nairobi, right? And I'm like, that's fucking wild. So we start becoming friends. We start getting to know each other really well. I end up being homeless like 3 years later. And when I was homeless, I I kind of realized I was in the same boat that he's in. Like he'd been floating around places that, people would let him stay around Nairobi and stuff. And I didn't really know how he was living until I started being homeless and we started comparing how we live. And I realized like most of the places there don't even have a toilet. They have a hole in the floor that goes down a pipe, and yeah, for the past few years I've been helping him out. He's my best friend. He's a person who's going to be on my podcast a lot in the coming future, and
Hmm.
my whole family has become involved with my buddy in Kenya, who his mom is actually a preacher and has like her own small church in like rural Kenya outside of Nairobi, like north
Right.
of
Hmm.
Nairobi, and is really him and his just perspective on everything. And also like he's smarter than me, dude. Like I'm a smart guy and he's smart. Like when I'm going through shit, and especially like when I was a street kid and I'm like really going through shit, this is like the one person in the world that I confided in and I trusted in and I saw like purity in, that I was friends with. And it was seeing the shit that he goes through versus seeing the shit that I go through and seeing the choices that led to what I was going through versus the lack of choice that is the reality of what he goes through. Do you get what I'm
Right.
saying? And
Yeah.
it's that contrast made me like so grateful to be American, to live in the safety of America. And yeah, that's like really when I kind of abandoned the left, is when me and him became like actually close. I actually started helping him out, actually started understanding how much we have here, you
Right.
know?
Hmm.
Yeah. And that's shit that I feel like these Antifa fuckface people, they all take it for granted, you know?
Well, they do. Most of them grew up in privileged families, so they think they could do whatever they want. And they think they could just go make these radical changes without even understanding the institutions they're trying to overthrow. Right? It makes zero sense to me. Like when they say I'm a communist, like, do you understand what that means? Do you
How many
understand
millions of
millions
people?
of people have died believing those things? I mean, read
Mhm.
any basic history book. right? It's
Yeah. I mean,
never worked. It's never
correct me
worked.
if I'm wrong, but didn't communism kill more people than fascism?
Correct. Yes, communism has
Yeah.
even killed more people than the Holocaust, right? Like it's
Yeah.
insane, right? And I don't understand why you want to live in a society where your government will just murder you, throw you in a pit, and you'll be forgotten to the to the dirt rotting in your brain of time. That's literally
Mhm.
what's going to happen to you. And these are some important things when it even comes to, when people discuss Russia and Ukraine, like, oh, these are communists trying to take over a free society. Well, that's not necessarily accurate. The USSR no longer exists. They do live under some type of dictatorship, basically still with Putin, but it comes to also their belief in the preservation of their culture. One of the main reasons that Russia invaded Ukraine is because they thought that they were going to be losing their Russian cultural ideology, which is Russian Orthodoxy, and having children and having their own types of Russian culture. They saw the West was infiltrating Ukraine, and with the Biden administration and their involvement with Burisma oil and gas and controlling the food supply to the Middle East, these are things that Americans don't know. As an intel analyst, I study these things. Russia has over 1,000-year history with that area and territory in Ukraine. It's basically only been its own independent country since the fall of the USSR, right? Everyone thinks it's about freedom versus communism. That's not exactly accurate. They do have, their tendencies to be more communistic because that's their history, but this is much deeper than that. They think like, oh, I'm going to bring that to the United States. Well, do you really want to live under what the Russian people have to live under? I don't think you
Mhm.
do. Like Russians have an interesting theory where they don't think anything's wrong in their government as long as they have a selection of yogurt, right? And America, you can go to a grocery store and they got 50 to 60 different types and flavors of yogurt. In the USSR, they don't feel the need to overthrow their government as long as they have a brand of yogurt, right? These people are very hard. They've lived with a lot less for decades. That's how their parents and their grandparents grew up. And that's just their mentality because they lived through the thwarts of communism and the destruction of their own internal society and religious values. The United States has not really experienced that, maybe since the Civil War. That's probably the closest we can get to those different types of ideologies being so exaggerated that we had to literally kill our own neighbors, right? But we would hope that we never get back to these things. And when a lot of Americans talk about civil war, what does that entail? Do you understand what you are saying when you say you want civil war in the United States? Now, as somebody who's seen combat himself, I do not desire that in our own country. I do not desire the need for having to defend myself against my neighbors who are trying to steal my flour or steal my water or steal my electricity because the government can no longer provide because they've collapsed. I do not think,
Yep.
Americans, all these fat, out of shape Americans, even the vet bros, I'll call them out right now. They think they're going to be able to defend their way of life and their family by their F-250 and their AR-15. I promise you,
Yep.
it's not going to work out that way. It's going to be way worse than you think. There are Americans in this country that are the silent majority that sit and wait for these things to happen, these prepper people, and those are the people you need to be worried about, right? You don't hear them advocating for political change. They sit and wait. Like, go ahead, try to start. I always make a really fun game with all my friends. I'm like, what is the most impossible country to invade in the United States? And just for fun, what state in the United States you think is the most uninvadable? If China or Russia or any of these other countries came here to actually fight in the United States, which state do you think that is impossible to invade?
Mm. I'd either go with something around Washington, D.C. or something around our nuclear silos out here in Montana.
So honestly, you know what the actual answer is, and I thought about this a long time.
Mm.
West Virginia. Go ahead, try to invade West Virginia and see
That's
what
what I was
happens.
thinking. Yeah,
Okay,
right near
deep,
Washington, D.C.
deep, dark woods, hundreds of thousands of miles of underground caverns, and people that have lived out there and know the lay of the land better than anyone else. It's pretty much our equivalent to trying to launch a counterinsurgency mission in Vietnam. It did not work. You can have B
Yeah, we got
52s, you can have bombers, you can have whatever you want. You ain't going to take down the locals who know this area and have lived here for over 100 years. It's just not going to happen,
yeah.
right? And if anyone's even watched the new movie Civil War, which I thought was very fascinating, a lot of people hated it. They thought it was a bad movie, but if you really dive into that movie produced by A24, that is very realistic to what would happen. Multiple local neighbors and communities would break up into their own militias. They would defend
Oh,
themselves, and they'd be very good at doing those things. And there is no way that you're going to be able to overtake those different sects over time. There's
yeah,
always going to
people
be,
don't get it, dude. They don't get it. Like I live in Gallatin County, Montana,
Mhm.
and I'm in with the prepper community here. I go to the gun shows, etc. I've been in the bunkers, bro. The civilians have bunkers here. We
Yep.
are hyper aware that there are nukes right over there. And because of that, we got hella bunkers here. Like Paradise Valley on West Yellowstone here,
Right.
there's probably 10,000 bunkers in that valley, dude. Like it's crazy. And I've been inside some of them, and I have friends who own some of them, you know, and people are like, yeah, we're going to have a civil war. I'm like, no, you're not. Like the
You're
minute
not.
you try, it's going to be it's not going to be what you think it is. Yeah.
Exactly. It's so all these people who are Antifa who run around with like an AR-15 or their black ski masks, thinking that they can't even sustain themselves for more than a week, even if they wanted to. They're going to run out of snack packs. They're going to run out of, batteries for their cell phones. These are not military trained people. And even on the baseline, most basic military trained people who did a couple years and got out, they're not even prepared for this type of conflict, long sustained warfare on a domestic scale. It's just not possible. And the last thing that these people should ever advocate for is a civil war here in the United States, because it would not, this isn't crossing the Mason-Dixon line with the Grays versus the Blues in the Civil War. This is not going to be an organized professional government fight, okay? This is going to be multiple different types of militia groups, going against the formal military or the National Guard or the Reserve and vice versa. And even as a person who serves in the Reserve and has served in the National Guard for 10 years, there's no way you're ever going to get me to shoot an American citizen unless they're actual domestic terrorist threat against my family or myself. It's just never going to happen. And I don't think Americans are really willing to accept those changes and what would happen. And most of these people who are in Antifa or in these small political change groups, they're going to be killed within the first like 30 days. Like they're not going to be able to survive this type of conflict. It's not possible.
Yep. And so when I was with the Antifa kids, one of the things that made them hate me is that they told my friend that I freaked them out, right? And part of that was because they were saying a bunch of commie bullshit, and I kind of wanted to freak them out because they're insinuating we're gonna have a civil war
No, you're
type
not.
shit, you know? And I just very bluntly, I was like, how adept and experienced are you at using ATAC? And they're like, what is ATAC? I'm like, oh, you guys don't know what ATAC is? Oh,
Yep.
well, here, let me explain. From my cell phone, if I work for the government, I can call into drone strike with ATAC,
Yep.
among a whole bunch of other things. I can do comms, I can do ground coordination for, infantry and stuff. Like, I can run a whole op. I can run a whole series of ops from my cell phone with ATAC. You don't know how to use ATAC? It's available for civilians. I'm surprised that you're calling for a civil war and you don't know how to use your own private networks with ATAC. And they're
Exactly.
just
Like
like,
the yeah
oh,
the
fuck.
mesh tastics software is something I've seen out here. Is civilians, especially in Colorado, are actually developing their own communication networks that don't rely on cell phone or government supported entities. There are people who know what they're doing, and these people have no idea
Yeah.
what they're doing. They rely on their cell phone. If their cell phone shuts out, they have no comms. They don't use
Mm-hmm.
encrypted radios, right? That they buy from Walmart, right? It's just I don't think these people understand what modern fifth gen warfare is going to entail, and they're not part of that solution. They are just cannon fodder at this point. I hate to say it, but
Yeah.
they're just not
Yeah.
going to be able to survive it. So what else did you see when you were on the ground infiltrating this group? Like, explain their ideologies, explain like what you were seeing
Yeah.
on the ground, how these people were
So
prepared, like what were these people talking about?
a lot of, like I said, hyper narcissism, a lot of pent up frustration and taking it out. Like that's like their whole existence, their whole identity existence, is just, I'm punk rock. Let's go fucking burn shit and break shit and steal
Okay,
shit. And,
cool.
so like their daily life is doing drugs, hang out, not having jobs. One person in the apartment had a job, and then they all talk about the jobs they used to have. They're like, oh yeah, I'm a healthcare professional. I'm a this, I'm a that. But they're not. They're all just bums doing coke every day on somebody's apartment floor. It's a big apartment. It's a 2-bedroom apartment with like 6 people.
Hmm.
And another thing too, they're a very good example of like if you could just like pick a fucking quintessential Antifa group, like they're disorganized, just useful idiots,
Yeah,
and they're hyper emboldened because of narcissism. They think they're making a change because they're oh so important. Do you get what I'm saying? And
yeah.
yeah, they're just very cringe people, like to be completely honest. And the one of the majorest things that I noticed with these individuals, like just like breaking down the psychology, is like a hyper lack of self-awareness while also being hyper self-obsessed. It's like paradoxical. It's like, how can you be like
Right.
so obsessed with like yourself and your own psychology, but not realize how cringe that you are? Like how is this possible? You know? And yeah, I really, so another thing that I think that a lot of these people suffer from is they're on some sort of like autism spectrum of some kind. Like, I'm not saying like they're all autistic, but they're all on some kind of spectrum. Not all of them, but I'd go as far as to say the majority or even vast majority of them.
Hmm.
There's some sort of disconnect, because like a normal person would realize they're being cringe, would realize like that, like you are the source of your own problems. Like you're doing a bunch of weird shit that makes people not like you, dude.
Yeah.
You know,
Hmm.
like most people, after getting kicked in the ass over and over and over again, they go, "Ow, my ass hurts." But these people
Yeah.
don't. Like it, you know.
Oh man, that's like America in general. These people get kicked in the
Yeah,
ass all the time and they ask, why does my ass hurt? Well, stop being a
yeah,
dumbass. Like, I don't know what to tell you.
yeah, bro. And yeah, like it was, like I said, a very weaponized mental illness. There's definitely powers that be above these people though that are guiding this herd. You know, like they definitely love MSNBC, which was surprising to me. Like they were actually watching MSNBC. And yeah, they're into the news. They watch the fucking news, but
Well, they're just
they
people that
only.
are easily inundated by propaganda, right? And
Mhm.
that's the fall of our society, is that if you believe anything your government tells you and the media streams that it runs, you're just a failed citizen, right? And that's one thing
Yeah.
I always emphasize in a lot of other podcasts, is that are you a resident or are you a citizen? A resident is a person who just uses the bathroom, goes to work every day, bitches online on the internet. A citizen is someone who actually participates in their local government. And Americans, instead of burning police stations down and destroying our cities, why don't you actually go to the county commissioner meetings? Why don't you actually participate in your elective process? Why don't you actually work for candidates to get them elected? If you don't like who's running your city, then elect new people. That is the part of the democracy that you can participate in and make a change in. That's what I've been trying to motivate people to do over the last 18 months, is actually participate in your democracy. Like, we got Gabe Evans elected out here with 2,500 votes, right? That required a huge effort, talking to hundreds of thousands of people and podcasting for months just to try to get that little bit of outreach to get people engaged. But you could sit here and bitch and complain about your government all day, but if you're not actually part of the process that can actually change government, because you're not going to violently overthrow them, it's not going to happen. As much as you
Yup.
want to create your own individual city in the middle of Portland, Washington, it's not, or Portland, Oregon, it's not going to happen, right?
Thing that
Like
these
you,
people don't realize is that the government has the government to back itself, plus the majority of Americans would be on the government's side.
yeah, and unlimited
Like,
funding and tactical
yeah.
vehicles and helicopters and fuel and the logistical aspects of warfare that people don't understand. The cops will let
Hmm.
you burn things down in a way sometimes if they have to. You want to know why? Because they're just going to rebuild it anyway. You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
if so, but if the cops burn your house down, you don't have a house anymore, and good luck building another one because you don't have any money, right? I mean, that's just
Yup.
how it's going to happen, right? That's why it was such an effective domestic terrorist scheme during the Revolutionary Wars, when the British soldiers would go around and burn down your church and burn down your house, because they know you don't have the resources to rebuild and you're going to suffer and die in the woods now, and your family's going to die of dysentery from unclean water, right? That's how these governments would fight in the future if they had to, because they have more resources. And the one thing that the US military does better than any other military in the world, which is why we're the most, it's not because we have stealth bombers, it's not because we have GPS, it's because we have the best supply chain and command supply abilities in the world. We can get an entire battalion of combat ready troops in any country, anywhere, in 72 hours. No other country has that capability. And never mind what they would have to do in the United States. It's even easier.
Speaking of that capability, as an Air Force guy, and you don't have to answer this if you're not allowed to. Have you heard the rumors that the SpaceX rockets are planned to be used like C-130s someday? You heard
Well, I
that?
mean, that's not really a secret. That's what they're doing now, right? I mean,
Because
is that they have the ability to now land and catch, right? So you can have the Falcon Heavy is the largest rocket system ever developed by humans, and it was developed not by the government, by a private entity. And now they have the ability to not only blast off and recover themselves for rapid redeployment, but they can deliver hundreds of thousands of pounds of payload. Now, this was designed for space. It would be much more difficult to land that cargo module, back to the back to Earth versus putting into orbit for the space station, the moon, or Mars, what they're trying to do right now. But yes, space transport and hypersonic transport is definitely where this country is moving towards. It was even a joke that we'd be able to strap Marines, space Marines, into one of these rockets and shoot them to another country and get them on ground within 20, 30 minutes, right?
So that's what I was curious about, because I had heard a rumor from prepper people that the whole motivation for the government for this is actually for warfare and to be able to deploy troops out of these rockets. And I'm like, well, wouldn't we have to have the landing things for the rockets in an enemy territory? Like, I don't know how that would work. And that's what I was
Well,
curious about.
yes and no, but I mean, you look at how they even landed the rover, right? They had parachute systems, everything else. The problem is that going to be a target? You know, is that going to be easily shot out of the
Mhm.
sky? You know, I mean, I'm sure that's something that's Lockheed Martin and SpaceX and Boeing are all working on in
Yep, but
behind the
we're not there
scenes.
yet.
No, we're not there yet, but also it's actually way more expensive. You have to think about the cost per
Mhm.
pound. I think Elon Musk came out, it was like $5,000 to $9,000 a pound to put something into space. So unless it's like a contingent emergency, it's actually cheaper just to fly them across the world in a C-17 in a couple days and just to launch them in a rocket and put them on ground anywhere else, right? We also have dispersed military operations all throughout the world. We can attack anything probably within 20, 30 minutes, and that's not even with ICBMs. That's with units like HIMARS. We also have MAGTFs out floating around in the ocean, Marine Air Ground Task Forces, where they are literally floating cities of cargo ships. If there is a war in a world or somewhere else, whether it's from Japan or from Hawaii or whatever else, we can put an entire combat ready self-sustaining unit on ground anywhere in the world within a couple days that can sustain operations for 90 days until more permanent support is flown in with the Air Force and the Army, right? So we already have type of those capabilities, and let's be honest, we don't have to be super reactionary. Even in a nuclear war environment, like we're not going to be putting that many guys on the ground if the Russians set off a nuke, so to speak, anyway, right? We have a couple days to sustain operations. We already have that capability. So I personally think, yeah, I think it's something fun to think about, like as a DARPA project, but in general,
Mhm.
I think our main mission, what Elon is trying to do is actually establish a moon base, actually be able to do rare earth mineral mining on the moon to sustain, fuel production for these rockets and actually start launching into Mars. I think that's the big progressive thing right now with space
Mhm.
operations and space exploration. But like I said, the United States military already has the capability to be anywhere in the world in 72 hours and fuck something up. So,
Okay, I got two more Air Force questions for you.
sure.
What do you so drones? I told you I was going to ask you about the drones,
hmm
and then I was also going to ask you before I asked you about the drones. Have you heard about, seen about, or read the new Annie Jacobson book about nuclear war?
I have not read that book yet, so I'm unfamiliar with that. But I mean, if we want to talk about drones, it's a government testing program. I mean, at least the stuff that I know on the unclass side, everything that's going on in New Jersey right now, there's just a lot of dumb, low information voters taking pictures of airplanes and like, oh, this is a drone. Like, no, you dipshit. Like, it has, and if these were nefarious drones, keep in mind, they also don't run around with green and red nav lights. If they have green and red nav lights and they're flying around, like they're being FAA compliant, oh, we can't pick up on radar. Well, unless you're near a tower, anything below 500 feet in Class G airspace can't be picked up anyway. But the
Mhm.
congressman from New Jersey who was claiming that there was an Iranian mothership and that, well, one, Iran does not have that capability. I know that for a fact. They cannot do that. It's not possible. If they were doing that, there would be a United States Navy submarine shooting that thing down with a destroyer out there hundreds of miles off the coast of New Jersey if they even tried to do that. And in addition to that, there's a company, and I put a video out about this with another podcast I was on about Reliable Robotics. So, Reliable Robotics is a new company that's been testing automated autopilots and air corridors. Basically, they want to be able to put this in every drone and in every aircraft, so that way it has an automatic traffic collision avoidance system or an automatic TCAS system in every aircraft and every drone. So that way there aren't drones hitting commercial aircraft or private aviation aircraft, and that's a huge government contract. That's a lot of money. If it was mandated that everyone had to use a reliable robotics automation, transponder on their aircraft or drone, that's guaranteed money for the government. That's guaranteed licensing requirements for drone operators. And I believe that's what's going on in New Jersey is that, and the reason I say that is because this guy specifically came out in congressional testimony, mentioned the CEO's name, and mentioned the company's name, which means he's being lobbied by this group in order to force the
Was this
government to.
Was this Schumer that did that?
No, it was like Government Van Ness or whatever from New Jersey, right?
Yeah.
So the interesting thing about Congressman Van Ness in New Jersey is that he is also responsible for the district that's in charge of the FAA traffic control training facility. So why would you be demanding Congress give New Jersey billions of dollars in funding for these things? One, it's good for his district. He gets more money allocated to his district, and that's a win as a congressman. Two, the FAA does a lot of their training out of that district in New Jersey, so more money for the FAA. Who doesn't like more money and wasting my tax dollars? And number three, when a congressman specifically mentions a CEO or the name of a company and demands that Congress fund these initiatives, he's being lobbied. This is a giant military industrial complex lobbying effort on behalf of reliable robotics across, and of course, with a bunch of other off the shelf commercial technology automation drone companies, especially what we've seen in Russia and Ukraine. And in order to force the American people to think that there is a threat, that everything is really scary, and we need to give the money to the government now in order to stop this, right? This is the same thing that happened with the Patriot Act. They were able to pass the Patriot Act under the fear and the guise of terrorism. And over the last 20 years, Americans have lost their individual rights. I hope that Americans are smarter now to see through these things, but I never trust a congressman when they start specifically talking about companies and CEOs. It's just a money grab. And that's what I tell people. There's also this rumor that was confirmed kind of by the Nuclear Atomic Energy Commission, right? That there was a missing damaged shipping container that contained nuclear material coming out of a port in New Jersey, and that these drones are out there flying around searching for it. Could that be true? Yes. I don't know anything on the back end about that. However, this was deactivated medical equipment that had nuclear material in it. So this is not
Like an
weapons grade.
MRI machine or something.
Yeah, exactly. This is not nuclear grade material. Even if you strapped a bunch of dynamite to it in a suitcase and set it off to create a dirty bomb, this isn't going to be a big deal. If there was a legitimate nuclear threat, not only would you have RC-135 reconnaissance aircraft flying around and all these drones, but you'd also have ground units. These ground units have been around since 9/11. They've been funded. They're basically these giant white vans that can do ground remote detection of nuclear capability, right? So I think this is all just propaganda and fear mongering in order to distract people from what's going on. I believe that this is a military, like I said, also, there's another thing. The federal government doesn't have to tell local people what's going on. They own the airspace. They do whatever they want. It's federally regulated, not by the states per se, right? So if they don't want to talk to the local police, they don't want to talk to the local FBI office, they just go, yeah, weird, must be aliens or something. Because then it just creates this giant chaos for people to go fight in the news for the next couple of weeks until it goes away. And if people say, oh, this is like New Jersey specific. No, this happened in Colorado back in 2021. They were flying giant fleets of drone aircraft to detect if the nuclear missile silo detection systems were working correctly, right? So it was a government program run by some unknown government contractor infiltrating restricted airspaces and high value target areas in order to see the reaction of our military and our police on the ground and see what they would actually do in those situations, right? Because magically a couple months later it went away and no one ever talked about it again. And people were like, oh, this drone stuff is going around the country. Correct. Exactly. They are testing our capabilities to detect these threats, and what is the local reaction going to be doing about it, right? It's very simple.
As a civilian, I do know this is a thing. I knew a kid who is dead now, and his name's Ray. I could say his name because he's dead, and he died of a drug overdose. Another one of the fentanyl thing, right? And but this dude was a hacker, and he got caught when he was 16 years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he was like a pretty serious fucking hacker in the Chicago area, right? He got caught when he was 16 years old. He got federally charged, et cetera, et cetera. And they're like, listen here, kid, you can go to jail for 25 years to life, or you can be an informant for us and continue to hack and just give us all of the algorithms and shit that you figure out, right? And
there's a great book about that called Ghost in the Wires, if you've never read it.
Yep. Yeah, I was his roommate for a while, and we like I lived in his house when he was doing this, and he would be like in his room on his radios, just like trolling the cops, trolling like this is right by Great Lakes Naval Base, so he's trolling them, like getting on all their frequencies. And his whole thing was he was like, I don't know how it worked. He was like hacking radio frequencies and then writing down whatever the fuck he's figuring out and handing that over to FBI agents, Right. And that was just a kid who got caught. So, but the whole point of that was counterterrorism. Do you get what I'm saying? And it was to feel out the vulnerabilities all of the time. He was, until he killed himself, he was doing that shit around the clock all the time, trolling the cops, fucking with the local cops in Chicago, and the military cops and everybody else in Chicago,
Right.
and none of them knew who he was. None of them had any idea who he was. They couldn't figure out why they couldn't bust him,
Hmm.
and I would be in the room when he'd be like trolling them, saying like really bad stuff that you can't say, and they be like, "We're gonna find you, kid. We're gonna da 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 da," and he's just like laughing to himself, like, "No, you're not. I have the FBI backing me." Yup.
Yeah. No, for sure. So, because we only got about like 15 minutes left here, what are some of the things that you learned from your experience, and what are something you can teach the American people about these psychological operations going on liberal, concentrated environments such as Antifa? And what can Americans do to better prepare themselves in order to deal with these types of groups in the future moving forward?
Yeah. So it's sneaky because it's a victimhood complex, So for people who are vulnerable, it's really easy to get sucked into this leftist ideology crowd without even realizing you're being sucked into it, because like people who are vulnerable have needing to fit in and to belong. I myself have gone through this, and that vulnerability opens you up to kind of like demons, like attaching
Hmm.
themselves to you and being like, "Oh, here's what's wrong with you, and it's also what's wrong with me. Now we're trauma bonded, and watch out for that shit. Watch out for people that can only relate to you through trauma bonding, because if that's the only thing that they're focused on in life, they're probably not living a life that's going to uplift your life, And I'm not saying to leave
Right.
people behind, but I'm saying, like, don't partake in victimhood mentality. And when you see your friends taking in victim mentality, remind them that they're strong. Like, remind them that they're stronger than what it is that's bogging them down. Like, even if you can't physically rise above something, you could still mentally rise above it. Like my grandpa had one leg and one eye, and he didn't complain about it. He just lived with it, you know?
Right. Hmm.
And yeah, you have to remind people of, like, we actually don't have it that bad. We have it incredibly good. And although this moment sucks, it's gonna pass. You're still gonna fall asleep when you get tired enough, you know? And yeah, just like I think that's the gateway. I think that for Antifa specifically, the gateway is victimhood, and that victimhood gets capitalized upon and transmuted into communism. Like, that's where it leads. It's fucking wild shit, dude. And they know it. Like, at the higher level of this fucking psyop, they know what they're doing. I don't know who exactly is behind it. I always want to like blame George Soros and stuff, but I don't know who the fuck is behind the leftist psyop, but they are definitely a tool of weaponized idiots who fight on the behalf of the deep state. I don't know exactly how it all works. I have my
Hmm.
theories, but that's what that crowd is to me. They're the biggest bootlickers on earth. Like, they're like, we're anarchists, but we represent authoritarianism. I'm like, those are opposing, contradicting concepts.
Yeah, it's such a joke, man. Like I don't understand how these people continue to exist. But like I said, these are not the people you necessarily have to be worried about. It's the people who are being silent, who aren't saying anything that you need to be worried about. Like I said, like those prepper guys, like those guys living in the mountains of West Virginia. Like those are the real
Mhm.
Americans you need to be worried about. These Antifa guys, they wouldn't last, like I said, more than 30 days in an actual sustained civil war conflict that they're demanding that they do, against the government of the
Yeah.
United States or any of these local entities. It's never going to work.
There's another thing is, like, all of these like homeless people and stuff, like homeless Antifa type people, I mean, right? Like,
Hmm.
they live off of donated food. Like they go out and like, I'm gonna go spange. That's what they call it, spanging. By the way, for people who've never heard that, it's spare changing, right? I'm gonna go spange. They're like, yeah, I'm gonna go spange today, and like, you'll like, I've had conversations with these people like, why don't you get a job? And they're like, why would I get a job when I can make $200 in 4 hours standing on a corner, bro? Like, they're dead
Yeah.
ass serious, and like they have no ambition. They have no ambition, so they never earn anything, and their life fucking sucks. And then they blame it on people who work hard. Like, oh, it's your fault that life sucks because everything isn't for free. We don't all have exactly the same for doing nothing. And that's the issue with communism is once you get everybody the same, exactly the same, nobody has any motivation to keep a society being one,
Right,
you know?
exactly. And humans are competitive species, right? They want
Mm-hmm.
to, have something to work for. They need purpose in their life. If they don't have purpose, then there's no reason to exist, right? And
Yep.
God demands that we do suffer, that we labor in order to enjoy our leisure, so that we can love each other better, right? Labor, leisure,
Yep.
and love. That's something that's even depicted in Genesis that I tell people all the time. Is that we are meant to suffer, but like I said, you have free will. You can suffer and not produce anything and die and rot in the ground. That's up to you. Or
Yep.
you can learn the true meaning of life, help humanity, further the good in our world, and get eternal life when you live your little 80-year miserable existence on this planet, right? That's what I tell people.
Something I
And
tell something I tell everybody, pick one person. Like we can't change the world. It'd be cool if we could, always take care of your family, always love your family, but like find a person who's not your family and make sure they're okay. Like have
mhm.
one person's fucking back. If everybody fucking did that, we'd all be a lot better off, and being friends with my
Yeah,
friend in
not
Africa taught me.
not all families blood related. That's a hard lesson I had to learn in my life.
Yep.
Just because you're genetically related to me doesn't mean you're family.
Yep.
I don't even talk to most of my family on my dad's side because I think they're terrible, awful,
Yep.
evil people, but I have amazing family that is related to me. And I also have amazing friends who I consider brothers and sisters, right? Who I work with on these advocacy things all the time. And we're working on making a positive difference in our local community because if not me, then who? Right? If you're not going to
Yep.
be the one out there making those changes, then who's going to do it? You're going to sit around and complain on the internet more and talk into a void? Cool. Sounds great. But I prefer citizens over residents, right? And I think you have definitely made a lot of these positive changes and you're trying to expose these things. So talk more, before we close out here about your Night with Antifa, where people can find you, where people can watch all these videos and the things that you're working on,
Yeah.
because I think what you're doing is fascinating. So,
Dude, yeah, thank you, man. So my channel is called the Wolf Channel, the Wolf Channel, spelled with a U, so like the Viking wolf. And it's my at is at VVVLF. So it's really easy, just keyboard gobbledygook, easy to remember. Once you see, you can't forget it. And I post all my videos to there. There's a playlist on that channel called A Night with Antifa, where all of the videos of that are in order. I have interviews coming out. I did 5 hours of interviews. So I interviewed people on the street and I also interviewed the ex-girlfriend of the ringleader of this cell. They're not like, it's not an official organization. So like cells, it's hard to like define what these groups are, right?
mhm.
But the kid who was like the ringleader of this little group, his ex-girlfriend, I interviewed her for 3 hours and I'm going to be releasing that before New Year's. So that will be on my channel. And in the meantime, there is a 2 hour documentary series broken into 4 parts that people can watch, which is called A Night with Antifa, Escape from Portland, which is my entire trip going out there, how it all went wrong, and how I stole a bunch of shit and lit it on fire, which I did film, and that's in it. And we got chased by cops in a helicopter and shit, which I filmed, and it's in it. And then there was a bunch of back and forth threatening of one another because they knew that I had this video. And then I was like, yeah, well, my air tag is in your van, so I dare you to fuck around and find out. And yeah, it turned into a whole fucking thing. And yeah, it's on YouTube. So VVVLF. That's how you find my channel, the Wolf Channel. That's me. Yep.
Awesome. Well, everyone out there, go check out the Wolf channel. I think this is definitely some insider information you're not going to see, from outside media propaganda outlets. And I want to thank you for all the work that you're doing. I want to thank you for all the stuff you've done for me in the background, helping me, get different things shut out
Uh,
for the podcast. I'm looking forward to working with you in the future here on this
yeah,
channel,
I love you so
especially
much,
moving into
bro.
the new year. Now, especially
Yeah.
moving into the new year, we're going to be doing a lot of stuff together, collabing on a lot of things. So, thanks for coming on the show today. I appreciate your insight. And for anyone who's interested, you can find him on Instagram, official Curse Content. And I look forward to seeing what you're going to be doing here in the next couple of years. So,
Yep. I just want to real quick. I just want to say, like, I super appreciate you. I'm such a huge fan. I found you organically, and you responded to me, and you inspired me a lot, man. So I just want to thank you for that. And I also want to shout out to anybody who does watch this. I am looking for people to collaborate with. So if anybody wants to do further infiltrations and things of that nature, I'm good at documenting shit, and I'm really, really good at infiltrating shit, and I'm not scared. So hit me up. There's ways of contacting me. It's all on my YouTube and my Instagram. So yeah,
Yeah.
thank you, man.
No, I agree. I think you're an amazing person. I think we're gonna do lots of good stuff. And maybe when Instagram stops shadow banning me, so people still can't look me up on Instagram unless we're already friends.
Oh wow.
That's a good time because every time I speak out against the government, I get blocked for another 90
Yep.
days. So it's every time. That's
Yep.
why I've been like quieter on social media because I'm trying to get these bans to time out. But man, it's can't
Yep.
talk about the truth because the government doesn't like that. Neither do all these transgender ideology groups who keep flagging all my stuff against the Air Force Academy. So,
Yep. I
but
just got all my bans lifted like a month ago, man. It's
oh, good
been
for you, man. I can't wait till I get that time back because yeah, it's
yeah.
ridiculous. But
They made me
hey,
scan my face. Yeah.
yeah. Well, thanks for coming on the show again, Wolf, and we'll see you next time.
All right, cool, man. Take it easy. Peace.